It's a very, very reasonable question, and one that was asked again about Donald Trump's government. But when it comes to essentially the answer of British politics, whenever chaos has seemed to have reigned during that particular day, the government ends up being brought down, and in some very spectacular fashions. And we're going to go over this article today because this article answers that question. Why not now? But also the fact that this chaos that Johnson is creating can permanently, potentially tar the Tory government for years, if not decades to come, that could have a very, very big impact on future elections. So at the moment, while, shall we say, Boris is indeed known as, well, he's like the golden boy currently of the Conservatives, just because he's contemporary known as that within the party doesn't mean that the Conservative Party in, say, the next 5 to maybe 10 years might not look back on the Johnson years as being something of a stain on the Conservative brand. It's very possible that could indeed happen. Like I say, history will indeed judge us all. Some people it judges a lot harsher, or shall we say better than others in some time, depending on, of course, current context. But indeed, that could be definitely the case for Boris Johnson, because the chaos that Johnson is sowing is not good or even conducive for a good government. Johnson likes chaos at the top. And the problem is, when there's chaos at the top, sooner or later, there's got to be a leader who makes the decisions. And when chaos rules, and with no strong leadership from Boris, well, eventually, as we have seen, we've gone from one disaster to another. And why hasn't this taken it Boris down? I think, in my opinion, it has largely been down to the fact that because Boris runs his government with so much chaos, he's managed to keep, shall we say, his hands clean of the chaos. But sooner or later, that chaos will catch up to Johnson. It's inevitable. So, as always, before we do dive into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for the support and for everyone else who supports the channel that way. So, let's dive into this, shall we? So, this comes from The Guardian, and like I say, the title is, "In the Past, Chaos Brought Down Governments. So why not this one?" Voters punish governments that lose control. That has been one of the ruling assumptions of the British politics and political commentary since the 1970s. In that infamous decade, Tory and Labour governments alike fell largely because they allowed everyday life to be seriously disrupted. First, during the 1974 three-day week. Then, during the 1978 and 79 winter of discontent. Boris Johnson has presided over more disruption than any prime minister for decades in education, agriculture, construction, the courts, manufacturing, exports and imports, the hospitality industry, retail, and above all, public health policy. He has rarely been able to present himself as in control of events. And unlike the crises of the 1970s, which led to almost no loss of life, his premiership has seen tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. The pandemic has been largely responsible for the chaos, of course, and has given his government a great alibi. But Johnson's own policies, including the hardest possible Brexit and his careless governing style, have greatly contributed to that disorder. Yet, as this week's Shuffling Reshuffle has suggested, his prime ministerial code of confidence remains undented. So why has all the chaos not left his administration seriously damaged? One explanation is that Johnson has made chaos his brand. From his artfully ruffled hair to his deliberately rambling speeches, he embodies the idea that success can be achieved by messy spontaneity. However rehearsed his spontaneity actually is, rather than careful planning. To many English people who believe that their country has always been a rebel in a rule-bound Europe, this vision of Johnson is very appealing. Similarly, many of his policies are meant to be very disruptive. Brexit, the culture wars, and levelling up are intended to upset the status quo, or at least to appear that way. In the anti-establishment age, with Johnson, the third Tory government in a row, creating turbulence, many to be the only way to make conservatism seem fresh and exciting. It also distracts from the fact that the right's closeness to many powerful English institutions and interests, from the press to big property developers, remains completely intact. But the public's apparent tolerance for chaos may also have deeper causes. Since at least the 2008 financial crisis, daily life and its wider backdrop have become more disorderly for many people. Erratic employment, extreme weather, political shocks, the constant flux of life online, even for some privileged Britons. A degree of turbulence has become the modern condition. By contrast, the crisis of the 70s occurred in a country that had been very relatively stable since the end of the Second World War. When this calm was disrupted, many voters were alarmed and angry. They believed that it was the job of the government, through the paternalist institutions of the welfare state, to keep them safe and help give their lives a pattern. Once the dubious achievements of conservatism since had been to erode those expectations from Margaret Thatcher onwards, Tory prime ministers have rarely shrunk the state, despite many promises to do so. But they have shrunk Britain's confidence about what the state can do. So when the state fails, as it has done so regularly and very spectacularly under Johnson, the government's poll ratings may dip, but they do not collapse. There is also a political edge to how Johnson's chaos is distributed as well. Benefits claimants, key workers, and the young are far more exposed than property owners and pensioners. As Thatcher did, Johnson and his ministers talk about Britons taking more responsibility for their lives while quietly making sure that the social groups that include vote Tory are cushioned by the state subsidies and tax advantages. For those groups, the government offers not chaos but continuity, endlessly raising house prices, old-fashioned English nationalism, and a near-perpetual conservative rule. Given all these political tranquilizers, is there any way that a widespread sense of public outrage at the state of the country could be awakened? For his first year and a half as Labour leader, Keir Starmer has been attacking Johnson's for his incompetence and lack of grip. Starmer has delivered detailed criticisms of Tory U-turns. He's expressed outrage at the government calamities, but nothing has really resonated. Increasingly, he has sounded exasperated and somewhat baffled at both Johnson's lack of interest in cohesive government and many voters' apparent commitment. Starmer's frustration has even spread to his colleagues. After the last Tory U-turn on vaccine passport last week, his deputy Angela Rayner said, "This is the culmination of a summer of chaos from ministers, and they urgently need to get a grip before winter." Rarely has an important political truth sounded so tired and robotic. One of Labour's problems is that it does not have access to the same machinery as the Conservatives for turning attack lines into widely believed narratives. The idea that the winter of discontent was purely about weak Labour governments and over tightly Labour unions, rather than workers reacting against low wages and higher inflation, has been sustained by the generations of right-wing journalists and historians, as well as by the Tory politicians. Labour simply does not have many storytellers on its side. And we've talked about this before, that Starmer needs to tell a good story, and he isn't a good storyteller. In opposition, both Harold Wilson in the early 1960s and the Tony Blair in the mid-1990s managed to convince a decisive number of voters that the Conservative governments were no longer coping with the country's problems. But Blair and Wilson were helped by the fact that a lot of Britons were already coming to that conclusion. Paying a lot closer attention they are now to the Tory political manufactions and scandals. Starmer has neither his predecessor's way with words or their forthright timing. That the Conservatives seemed far more focused on internal power struggles and personal matters on effectively governing the country suggests greater confidence. But that will not be chaos-proof forever. One of the lessons of the early 21st century Western politics is that parties can seem impregnable and then suddenly be in freefall. So much has happened since Johnson became Prime Minister. It is often easy to forget that his government has existed for barely 2 years, and that it has not kept its gravity-defying act for that long. And this month, heading towards winter, with the virus spreading again, the economy slowing, and increasingly acrimonious battles over public finances, the government is already starting to slag in the polls. The reshuffle is an acknowledgement that it has its problems. Yet, whether Starmer can actually pin all the disasters on them since the 2019 on the Tories, and how it affects the next election, are not the only issues that matter. An equally important question is how this lethally incompetent government is remembered in decades to come, and what influence that has on more distant elections, on the long-term reputation of the Conservative Party, and on the national story that Britain tells itself. For a long time, the Tories won the war over the meaning of the 70s. The war over Johnson years have only yet to begin. So, I've said this before. I don't think Johnson is going to be at the start. I don't think Johnson is going to be remembered over favorably as being a good prime minister. He's been over again. It's easy to forget he's only been in for 2 years, and yet I sort of understand when Donald Trump came in, and you got a lot of American commentators saying all this has happened, and I can't believe it's only been 6 months. So I understand now where a lot of those American commentators are coming from in that regard when they're talking about that. So again, it's very interesting. And as I said, this chaos cannot be kept up forever. The lies about Brexit cannot be sustained forever. Like I say, when we get these trade deals through, that will be bad. The absolute deteriorating system in Northern Ireland cannot be sustained forever. Very likely, potentially Scotland will go in either the next parliament, if not the one potentially after. We'll have to see. Although, like I say, polling numbers for independence, again, according to my friend, down below now potentially around about 50%. So it's dropped again. It seems to go in peaks and waves, but there you go. Yeah, sooner or later, Johnson will fall. It happens to everyone. No one is untouchable. And Johnson himself, again, is not untouchable. Like I say, he has been sacked in the past for his mistakes. And again, thinking that he was just untouchable. So sooner or later, these mistakes and this chaos will eventually engulf Johnson. And I think this autumn is going to be very interesting to watch. Not only will we have COVID running rampant, but the budget is going to be a huge battleground. We've got the £20 a week cut to universal credit, which is many Tories are now against, because that's going to affect hundreds of thousands of potential Tory swing seats, hundreds of, again, people in the red wall who voted for the Conservatives this time around. A lot's happening very quickly in the next 2 or 3 months. So, and as the article said, some parties that have seen completely impregnable have ended up in complete freefall from out of nowhere. So we're going to have to see on what happens. But like I say, this winter is going to be very, very interesting to see. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.